Welcome to Belfast, Wales. Today's guest is Sylvia True. Sylvia was originally born in Manchester, in England. She now lives in Massachusetts, where she teaches chemistry at Holliston High School, where she's also the head of science and technology department. During the summer break, Sylvia likes to travel to the Amazon to conduct research. And Sylvia's parents were refugees who originally fled from Nazi Germany, which ties in with what we have here for today, which is her second novel, Where Madness Lies, which is based on her own grandmother's experiences in Nazi Germany. Where Madness Lies is released on the 1st of February. So Sylvia, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Just before we get into the novel itself, can you tell us a bit about your parents who fled Germany? And obviously, today is quite the timing for our interview is quite poignant. Today is World Holocaust Memorial Day.
Right.
And that obviously that event is being commemorated as well as now I think they've added on commemoration of other acts of genocide. So, could you tell us a bit about your parents who fled Nazi Germany and who came to the UK before eventually moving to the United States itself?
Sure. As it happens, both of my parents were born in Frankfurt. The families didn't know each other. They were both pretty, in some ways, elite. My mother's side was a very aristocratic family. My father's side was more intellectual. My mother's side fled a little bit earlier. They were a little bit more politically connected, I think. And there was also this other issue of mental illness, which is really what the book is about, that my grandmother was dealing with her younger sister. So I think that sort of alerted them to a lot more of what was really going on. They fled to Switzerland, my mother's family. My father's family got out just in time because my grandfather, who was a doctor, and he was actually the doctor of the Frank family, Anne Frank's family in Frankfurt before they fled to Amsterdam. He just absolutely, my grandfather was just the kindest, most wonderful man. He just didn't believe humans could ever do this to each other. And I mean, I was just on a walk with a friend today, and we were just sort of talking about like how, rage and mob mentality, because we've got all this stuff going on over here in the States. We were just talking about like, when does it cross over to actually like really physically harming other human beings? And what does that take? And you just don't want to believe, like, even with what happened in, here a couple weeks ago, we don't want to believe that anybody would really end up like trying to murder other people, but they do. And it's so hard. It was really hard for my grandfather to believe that people would treat other human beings the way they obviously did. And his cousin actually literally pushed him on a train for his family to get out. And they fled to England outside of Manchester, which is where I was born. My mother skated. My mother was Swiss. She became Swiss national champion skater, trained in England, but my father, we moved to the States later on. He was a theoretical nuclear physicist. I'm going to give you a quiz on all this in about 2 seconds. It's a lot of info. Just remember, I'm a teacher.
When they fled, did they flee? Was this in the early 30s when Hitler came to power, or did
No, my father's family fled like 1938.
Okay.
And my mother's family fled around 36 or 37. So, I mean, my father, I think he was just they were about one of the last families to get out.
Yeah, very, very fortunate. And then, when did they come to the United Kingdom after the war then, or?
No, my father's family came before the war, and my grandfather, who was a doctor, they stripped him of his medical degree in Germany. He had to go and get another medical degree. He did it in Scotland, actually, and then he practiced medicine in England during and after the war.
And the book, Where Madness Lies, It's a story about the high price of repression in Nazi Germany. Obviously, how does this link to your own family?
What was the hardest thing for them?
Yeah. How does how does the book it says how does the book link to your own to the repression? Bear with me. Where Madness Lies is a story about the high price of repression in Nazi Germany. How does this link to your own family?
So I think repression is a huge factor in a lot of what happened in my family. And I think that happens in a lot of families for all different kinds of reasons. But mostly I will say on my mother's side, but it was there on my father's side as well. What happened to my mother and my grandmother, especially my grandmother in Germany, was particularly tragic because of the mental illness factor of her sister. And my grandmother tried everything to help her sister. She did an enormous amount of research. They got the best doctors. Her sister was put in the best institution. But because of the belief in eugenics and because of sterilization laws and eventually euthanasia laws, my great aunt couldn't be saved. And when my grandmother left Germany, they lost their money. She lost her sister. She had to leave her husband. He was the only person, my grandfather on my mother's side, that wasn't Jewish. So because of the Nuremberg laws, he would not have been able to continue. He was a chemistry professor. He wouldn't have been able to continue his work if he stayed married. So my grandmother essentially left the country losing everything. Family, money, husband, status. And I think what happened to her was she got very closed off. It was too painful to keep going back to that. So she started controlling things, like little things. Every clock in her house had to go off at exactly the same second every day.
Okay.
And that's no big deal, but it was just a sort of a symptom of this need to control because she couldn't control anything. She had lost all control. And then I think what happened was a lot of what happened, all the trauma, got repressed. That also happened on my father's side. He was, treated really poorly and beaten in Nazi Germany at school, and they smashed his classes, and they failed him. And, if you'd ask him, he died about a year ago, if you'd ask him up until like the end of his life, how was your life in Germany? He would say, oh, it was fabulous. I had such a great time. So there was just all of this repression, and there was a lot of repressed fear. And I think what happens in families is that then it seeps out as other kind of things, mostly anxiety. I think there was a lot of shame and anxiety in the family because of these repressed secrets and repressed past and repressed traumas. And, it never comes out in a pretty way. And it certainly affected me in a huge way. I think that I was probably depressed most of my life. And then in my 20s, I was really struggling and feeling like I couldn't hold on. I was having terrible anxiety. I couldn't even drive a car anymore. Terrible depression. And I was scared. I had no idea what to do. So I decided that the cure for this, was to have a baby.
Okay.
And, well, just so you know, that's not a good cure. It was a great thing to have a baby, and she's a beautiful, wonderful adult now with 3 children of her own. But, at the time I was like, well, I don't know how to get better. It was too shameful. We weren't allowed to talk about any kind of mental weakness. You know what I mean? It wasn't allowed at all. So I thought, well, this will cure me. I had a child, and that actually ended up making me extremely depressed. I had postpartum on top of regular depression, and I ended up in a mental hospital. And the interesting thing about that is my grandmother, who was still in Switzerland, actually came to my aid and helped me. And slowly, it wasn't a necessarily quick process, but slowly uncovered the past, dealt with some of the fear she'd been dealing with. And it was this opening up, and it was also a feeling for me, because when I first was admitted to McLean is the name of the mental hospital, I was asked all the time, any mental history in your family? I was like, nope, absolutely not. We're perfect. Because that's what I was told, and that's what I was supposed to behave like. And I think a lot of families have that, yeah, we're all perfect. We have no issues at all. But what happened to me was, when my grandmother came to help and slowly revealed these secrets of her sister and the Nazis and where all these crazy beliefs of needing to be perfect came from, I didn't feel so alone. It sort of set me free. And it also guided us in this healing process, because we were finally able to talk about things and bring them to light. I was able to heal, the family was able to heal. So it was actually a beautiful thing. I mean, I know I was supposed to be ashamed of saying I was in a mental hospital, but it was the most important event of my life. Yeah. And, I should say, if my daughters, God forbid, ever listen to this, aside from having my children.
Definitely, I think all families definitely they don't talk about things, or and I think when you repress things or push things to the peripheral and just carry on, these things always have a way of coming back around. Might not happen for 5-10 years, but they always have a habit of eventually coming to the surface. So it's either I suppose it's like taking a loan from a bank. Sooner or later you're going to have to pay it back.
Right.
Yeah,
I love that. I love that analogy. I love that. It is absolutely, you have to pay it back with interest. Yes. Yeah. And it's a lesson, we hear over and over again about secrets, and until it kind of happens to you and blows up in your face, you don't really understand the impact of how dangerous they can be.
I think that ties into even conflict as well. On a larger scale, if you look at what happened in Europe during the reign of the Nazis, the Third Reich, what they done as a reverberation. In fact, I think all kind of conflict has a reverberation effect that is felt generations way into the future. People think, oh, that's ancient history, or that's history that doesn't affect us today, but actually it does. It has a cast what I call a long shadow. Going into that, because I was preparing for this interview. So in 1939, I was reading the Nazis start the Euthanasia program, or Action T4 program.
Right.
More about this, and how do the Nazis treat those with mental health issues?
So it's really an interesting piece of history. The whole sort of movement from eugenics to sterilization to euthanasia. So in around 1888, a guy named Sir Francis Galton came up with the term eugenics, and it was really a biological thing that people were like, how do we get rid of disease? I mean, we're thinking about that today. We're thinking about like, how do we get rid of COVID? Although we're not going to think of it quite the way it ended up then. But how do you do this? And so you had a lot of eugenics who really believed in, well, you do it through sort of weeding out the weaker genes. And that was the idea behind it. These eugenic societies were huge all over the world. I mean, it wasn't just Germany. And in fact, America sort of was leading the way initially with sterilizations. And the idea was, you sterilize people who are mentally ill, or what they call feeble-minded, and then you weed them out, so to speak. In 1933, the Germans passed their sterilization law, and between 1934 and 39, they sterilized over 400,000 people. So that was huge. That became a huge thing there. It didn't thankfully happen everywhere, although a lot of people sort of understood. But then, of course, in Germany, they took it further and, enacted the euthanasia program. And in that program, they identified their victims, they built the gas chambers in the mental hospitals. There were 6 large institutions that actually built gas chambers that were similar to the gas chambers that were used then in the camps. The doctors actually from those mental hospitals, the psychiatrists, were moved to the camps to design them there. So in many ways, you can look at the history of mental illness and what happened in Germany there as their opening act. Because what they did in the mental hospitals was what they ended up doing in the concentration camps. They used gas chambers, they cremated the people, they pillaged the bodies. Everything that they ended up doing in the concentration camps, they did first in the hospitals. So it's very drastic, obviously. And just as my great aunt, who was diagnosed eventually with schizophrenia, we don't know what she might have been diagnosed with today. It doesn't seem at all like it was cleared schizophrenia as it might be diagnosed today. The Germans at that time labeled a lot of people with that. If they didn't perfectly fit, it didn't matter. Schizophrenia was pretty much a sure death penalty.
Yes. So basically, it was just a term that was used just to cover anybody. Pretty much, they didn't really kind of the person's condition.
Well, I think maybe not necessarily anybody, but so now if we look at some psychotic behavior, right, it wouldn't necessarily be schizophrenic. It could be a lot of different things. But I do think that it was overused at that time.
Yeah. And when I was reading about the Action T4 program, as you mentioned there, the similarities to the procedures they use in the camps is literally identical. Tricking people. I think in one gas chamber they had music playing as people went in,
right?
To make it feel as if you're just going in for a shower, and we'll be waiting for you when you come back out. And I think it goes back to what you were saying about your own family. I think a lot of people back then just didn't have that kind of. I think they just couldn't accept or couldn't imagine that people would be so barbaric, would have those intentions.
Right. And I mean, they did. I mean, so they first the whole idea behind this initially was to be a mercy killing. Was that the belief that these people obviously and their families would be better off if they weren't alive, that it was painful for them, it was painful for their families. So the idea was, to do it, supposedly gently, and they, in the mental hospitals for sure, I don't think that happened at concentration camps, but when you think about that, we see now it's crazy. But I mean, my grandmother, in some weird ways, carried those beliefs with her to Switzerland, because in Switzerland, where I spent a lot of time, in the little village she lived in, it was called Arlesheim. And on the way home from, the village to her chalet, often pass this beautiful home, and it was a home for disabled children, right? And they would often be playing out in the garden or whatever. And my grandmother would stop and tell us when we were very young, those children would be better off if they were dead. And I remember that because, like, as a kid, I'm like, what's the difference between them and me? Like, I didn't really know. Like, I'm sure maybe an adult would say, well, it's obvious. Well, it's not obvious to a child, right? I mean, they're children, they're playing. I don't know what a disability is or anything like that. So it's pretty terrifying. And it's interesting that she still had some of those beliefs. I mean, she was Jewish, her sister had died, but, you know, those beliefs in eugenics were really deep-rooted in the society.
Yeah, no, I think it's really been, what, the last 30 odd years that a lot of people a lot of children or a lot of individuals who you know, like even who have Down syndrome or whatever, are playing more of an active role in society. Like I remember when I was a kid, you wouldn't have seen, like, I think a lot of people kind of, if they had a child who was Down syndrome, they were kind of literally kept indoors.
Right.
Whereas now, you see a lot more people, if they're out, they're working in a shop, they're actively participating in society itself. So there's been a big paradigm shift in the last 30, maybe 40 years.
Yeah.
Where things got better. Obviously,
I mean, right now I'm in my office at school, right next door. You can't see, but I'm pointing. They have their special ed room, right? And so those kids come to school every day, and when they're able to participate in classes to some degree, they do. And you know, it's so interesting because I'm older. I've been doing this for many years. Seeing how well they're integrated now, and like literally the joy that they bring. I remember this one girl in particular. Like, I don't even know. It was almost like a spiritual thing when you saw her walking down the hall. I mean, this girl was so full of only joy. It was pure joy, and you could feel it. And it's like, oh my God, why wouldn't you want them around? You know what I mean? You know, and it's so nice now, and I've watched the changes over the last 25, 30 years in schools, like just to see the acceptance, and, you know, it's a beautiful thing.
Definitely. Obviously, this is something, referring obviously to the book here, obviously this is something that's very real to you. We always talk about the repercussions that happen in your life. In the book, names have been changed, and some of the details are how you imagine them, but the essence, or the bare bones of the story is true. Can you give more details on the true scope of the very tragic part of human history?
Sure. So basically, you know, what happened to my grandmother and what happened to my grandmother's sister was clearly what happened. Some of the details around that, you know, I had to research and get from historical things. And that's interestingly because although she did end up opening up, you know, people who lived in that particular time and who fled really hated to talk about it. My father didn't talk about it. My mother didn't talk about it. My grandmother, you know, only when there was this moment in time when it, you know, it was clear that it would really help me, was it finally revealed. So, you know, the bits in the book so the book takes place in two time periods, in the 1930s in Nazi Germany, when my grandmother was dealing with her sister being ill, and then in the 1980s when I was in a mental hospital here and my grandmother came to visit. So that one's actually much more accurately true because it was me and it was what happened to me. But the book is fictionalized in that some of the things that happened in Germany, I know the big sort of milestones, but to give depth to the characters, some of the characters like Arnold, there's a doctor in it named Arnold, and I had to do a lot of research and sort of create him, which is really the fun for me too. I mean, fiction is fun to write when you can create these characters.
Yeah. No, I think definitely, and I think it's been not that long ago. I think the last person who actually fought in World War One passed away, and we're now, unfortunately, we're now entering that phase where there's very few Holocaust survivors about, and all I think long term all we're going to have left is obviously the written word books, written accounts, video interviews, and I think then also the next stage is yourself, is people like in your position as well who weren't there but their family was.
Right.
I think it's great that that even in a fictional work, it's educating people. Hopefully, I'll get people to go after they finish reading the book to look more into it, like what happened. And I know it's a very, very dark part of human history, but I think it's really important to look at and understand more.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that the other piece of that is this whole, one of the other themes of the book is obviously the way that families, whether it's from Nazi Germany or many other things, the way they pass down fear and guilt and shame. Not like, I don't think any mother goes out to like, I'm going to be a bad mother, but we all make mistakes, right? And I think that there are a lot of families who repress things and hide things. And I mean, this book, I guess, is somewhat of a cautionary tale about that, whether it's alcoholism or whatever else you have in your family. I'm not you, Jonathan, but you know what I mean? Like, what family doesn't, right? Have some secrets.
Yeah.
And, this is a way to start thinking, sometimes maybe those secrets are better kept. Believe me, I'm not telling anybody what to do, but it's a way to reflect and say, when we keep secrets, what does get passed down,
Yeah. I think it's I think it's also a thing, people are scared to be, I think it's a fear of looking weak, or I know looking back at even my own family, it's the old saying that I used to hear was, you don't air your dirty laundry in public.
Right. Right.
Fear of other people judging you, and I think that it's that fear of being exposed. They've got one of their families mentally unwell. Like, used to hear when I was growing up, you've heard, so and so had a nervous breakdown. There was no, you don't hear you didn't hear the word depression or anything. It was just that lady had a nervous breakdown. I remember as a child going, what is that? And you think it's a disease that's attacking your nervous system, because you don't have any concept. But I think I think it's that old fear of being of looking bad in the eyes of others. But I think when you worry about what other people think, I think we're I think as a society we're starting to change that dynamics. I think you hear a lot more celebrities coming out with mental health issues, and you hear more people, which I think lessens it or helps make it less of a big deal to talk about. Going back to obviously your family, when did they open up? Was it more near the end of their life? And what was it like for them? Like, what did they have to do to survive?
So aside from obviously, I think that they felt they had to repress a lot to survive. But if I look at my parents, what they did and they did very different things, but both were a means of survival. My father was just an incredible intellectual. I mean, he just didn't believe in ever talking about emotions. Now, what's interesting is he might have believed, he didn't believe in sharing them or talking about them, but they came out of him in not the most pleasant ways. I mean, he would come home and scream about things like the curtains weren't closed properly, like there was like maybe a tiny bit of, like, so there was a lot in him that, sort of got spat out in maybe not the best of ways. But what I think he did is he went into study. He learned, not only was he a theoretical nuclear physicist, but he knew everything about history and opera. Like, for him, it was all an intellectual pursuit. And that's a beautiful thing. I mean, he was a brilliant man. He did some famous work in physics. Now, my mother, they were sort of like opposite ends. It's kind of funny how they ended up being together forever. But my mother went to the physical. So as a young child, I think she was anxious. She didn't know what that meant. She just knew she was nervous. She wasn't allowed to ever show, especially in her family, because of the mental illness. You can never be weak. You can never be depressed. And fortunately, a doctor, by chance, told her mother, she had weak ankles. So they put her on ice skates. And skating is what saved her. It was a physical, like, if she was doing something very physical, that, and we know that helps anxiety and depression, like, you go for walks and you do that. And that actually saved her. So, I had the mother who was the Swiss national champion skater and the father who was the theoretical nuclear physicist, and they were both so passionate about their careers. And I do think that just did an incredible amount to help them get through life.
Oh, yeah. The different means of coping, different coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
You wrote an essay in Psychology Today, basically suggesting that mental health is something we inherit. Can you touch on this a bit more?
Sure. This is not something I think we don't know for certain, obviously. I do remember when I went to college forever ago, but we were taught that our personalities were 80% environmental, 20% genetic. And I think now we see that, I don't think, for the most part, none of us would believe that. Maybe we'll say 50-50. I don't know what the percent is. But clearly, with what we've learned in the last 30 years, we know a lot more is genetic. It's clearly in my family, there's a strong genetic line of depression and anxiety, which is what I believe my great aunt probably, had as well. Just a very severe depression with some probably psychotic tendencies. And both of my daughters also inherited some of this, although one of my daughters is inherited more the depressive end, and one of them more the anxiety. I got lucky and I got both. But what was wonderful in my life was, after I got out of McLean, Erica was my firstborn. She was still a baby. And I could parent without the shame of worrying about mental illness or what people thought. So when Erica began, showing signs of depression, I attacked from all angles. She went to a psychiatrist and a therapist and of course a psychic, because those people helped her. And that's, that has been very important for me as a mother and as a teacher to be open about these things, to say they're not shameful. It's like if you have diabetes, what are you going to not go to the doctor and get it taken care of? Of course you're going to go to the doctor and get it taken care of. And this is the same. Maybe if you have diabetes, you wouldn't go see a psychic, but I don't know. As a mother, I was like, I'm going to help my children. I'll do whatever. Because I was not, it was clear in my teens and, early on in my 20s that I was really struggling. And one of my chemistry professors actually had told me, I think you would be really helped by going to therapy. And I didn't know anything about therapy. And I thought, well, he's just being nice, which he was. He genuinely cared about me. And I went home and I told my mother, I said, look, my chemistry professor said I should go to counseling. And my mother just slammed the door. And she was a really warm, gregarious woman. But in this instant, because it had such a huge effect on me. I mean, she slammed the door and she was like, no child of mine shall ever see one of those people. So, it was so much fear around anything that was wrong with you at all mentally. And I did not want my children to feel that. So they're very comfortable with me talking about it.
Yeah, I think it shows that deep-seated fear, that taboo of mental health issues.
Right.
I think there's just a real, I think within society there's just a deep-seated fear of it, and I think it's also something that obviously, again, we're touching on this again. Until recently, people didn't understand it. It was just like, put yourself together and get on with it, and
right.
I think
right.
even employers would have just thought, oh, you're making excuses. You don't want to work. I'll get rid of it. I'll get somebody who will work. Whereas now, if you were suffering from stress, your employer will go take time off. Will even supply you with a counsellor or recommend someone to you. But it really goes to how deep rooted, I think, across various countries,
right,
on mental health is. You touched on just briefly there. You have a strong belief in the paranormal, and in the novel itself, there's one person who has visions which hints towards the paranormal. Is this what you hope the reader to think? And another question: why did you add the paranormal layer into the book?
So, for a number of reasons. Yes, because I think that opening my mind, I got really lucky. I came from a very scientific family who was, they did not believe in this. And this was like, yeah, you're crazy. You're again, it was almost associated with a weakness. Like if you believe, almost like some people think religion and having faith is, you need faith because you're too weak. So it was something that was really frowned upon in my family. But after I got out of the plane, I met a friend, and he told me about that his mother was psychic. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't believe in that. Then he told me some stories, and luckily I was just beginning to also open my mind up to a lot of different things. And he told me some stories, and I was totally intrigued, and I was like, okay, I'll go try this. And that's when I met my friend Sophie, who sadly also died, like my father did, about a year ago. And she was my sort of mentor and guide for 30 years. She was unbelievable. But anyway, getting a little back to the book, and then I'll get back to Sophie. But so yeah, I wanted that in the book for a number of different reasons. Partly because it is what I believe in, and partly because there are people who are sometimes put in mental hospitals who maybe have a paranormal ability. Now, I'm not saying, believe me, there are all kinds of, there's all kinds of psychosis, and, you have to look at each individual case. You can't say, oh, anybody who's having visions is, connected to the other side. I don't believe that at all. But in this case, this character was psychic and did also have visions of spirits. And she was in a halfway home before she went into the hospital, and she knew the house. She had a psychic premonition that the house was going to burn down. The house did burn down, and she had told everybody before it happened, so they blamed her. And so she ends up in the book having visions of my great aunt, my grandmother's sister, and my grandmother is in the hospital visiting me. And it also pushes, the idea is also that this character, my grandmother can't deny that this character is seeing something, and that what this character sees is clearly details about the great aunt. And the major trajectory of the grandmother is to get from this closedness after the war to an openness about her whole life. And the psychic visions kind of push on those boundaries, and they make her open up a little bit. In the end, she actually does have a vision of her sister as well, although she has a fever, and it's ambiguous. It's not 100% clear, is that actually a vision or is it not? But I do think that because the theme of the book sort of moves toward an openness of thought and a curiosity of, like, what was your life really like? A curiosity of the other person, which brings empathy. I just thought it was an important dynamic. It brought some depth.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I hope.
No, definitely, because I suppose it again, we were talking about this. It kind of, it's a way of making your grandmother address the past. It's like,
right.
The other characters represent these visions, and obviously then the character, your grandmother, then always has to address that. She can't. I suppose what people sometimes would say is she can't move forward until she addresses the past, and then that allows her to move onwards.
Right.
Is continue with that? Is the ambiguity between mental health and the paranormal? Where does one start and the other end?
So, I mean, it depends, right? It's individual. I think that in the case with this particular character, I think you can see she's not mentally ill, although, there are a lot of people who think the belief in the paranormal is, I'm not going to say, they don't believe it's a mental illness per se, but that it's crazy and you're imagining it, or it's just you want to believe it because you have a need to connect to people who have died, and therefore, again, like my family would have considered it somewhat of a weakness, right? Like, I do believe that, my mother and grandmother, that their spirits are around, and is that a weakness because I would miss them too much if I didn't believe it? I don't know. I don't think so, because I've had so many experiences with mediums and psychics, and my daughter actually calls me the medium hunter. So what happened is, I met this woman, Sophie, who read cards. She actually read regular cards. She didn't read tarot cards. She read what we call playing cards. But playing cards were first invented as fortune-telling cards. So she read those throughout, I knew her for over 30 years. And during that time, then I got more interested in, mediums and then past lives. And it was interesting because first I was like, okay, after going to Sophie and I mean, it was amazing, some of the stuff, right? And I can tell you a couple little stories, but after going to her, I was like, okay, I know psychics are real, but I definitely don't believe in mediums. And then I was like, wait a second, why is there a boundary there? And then Sophie actually had told me when my mother died that her parents would be there. And my mother, when she died, her parents were there, and she told me and my brother, like, her mother and grandmother were there waiting. And you hear those stories all the time in nursing homes, and people, who are coming close to the end of their life, they do get visitors, and they're very vivid, and they really feel like those people are really there. And that's when I sort of began to realize, oh, okay, there's not just a psychicness, there's much more to this. And it's fascinating. And it's been one of the best journeys of my life to explore this. Because I'm a science teacher, but we've renamed our science department. We're the Science, Technology, and Paranormal Studies department now.
Nice.
Well, sort of as a joke, but actually we've all gotten involved. And, it began as lighthearted discussions. And then there's a lot of research at the University of Virginia. And we started researching, not just me, but some of my colleagues. And then one of my colleagues and I went to Ireland to visit a medium. So we've been sort of, exploring. And it's all about being open-minded, right? There's a saying I love. Only a closed mind is certain. And that's so true. Like, people used to believe the earth was flat, and if you didn't believe that, you were nuts.
Yeah.
So some people, say there's no such thing as the spirit world or an afterlife, and if you believe that, you're nuts. Well,
there was I apologize to yourself and the viewer because I can't remember the scientist's name, but there's a scientist recently I've seen interviewed. He's an astronomer for Harvard, and he was saying one of the problems he has with his colleagues, it was to do with an asteroid that was passing the Earth, and he attributed the unusual characteristics to like relic or like leftover from like an alien ship, and he got obviously a lot of blowback from his colleagues, but he was saying we're scientists, but we should be curious about this. We should, why not entertain that theory, go down that avenue, have a look at it, and see where it takes us. And I think that it is a good thing. I think it's very another guy on Lionel Friedberg, and I'm not going into detail, but he met like what we would call a medium, a Nganga, in Zambia, and this lady predicted pretty much. They gave him a series of predictions. That at the time he kind of thought, right, okay, but as he went through his life, he started connecting the dots to what she had said. But as he was saying the same thing, he said it's good to have an open mind, but not. He said have an open mind, but don't be gullible, but at the same time be open to explore new experiences, new things like that. There, and I think that's important. That's what essentially makes us human, is that curiosity of the world.
Right. And it's interesting because really they have like mountains and mountains of data of people having different sorts of paranormal experiences, and some people still just brush it aside. And like I know this is a weird comparison, but there was a huge study done with vaccinations and how vaccinations led to possible autism. Now, it was a completely made up study, right? It's completely false. And people still believe that. There are like mountains of data about people, all kinds of things, right? Children remembering a past life. I mean, these are things that have actually been researched and documented. And yet, no, that's ridiculous. I don't know. I want to say, why? You'll believe that vaccinations cause autism, even though that was a fake study, and you won't believe something that there's mountains of data for, and that's fine. I mean, it's just so fascinating to me. Like, why wouldn't you just want to be curious?
Yeah, no, definitely. Obviously, what elements of your life connect to events of where madness lies? I know you mentioned the book obviously covers two periods of time, 1930s and then obviously 1980s. So obviously, if you could go into more detail on that, where that ties in with events in your own life.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the question.
Yeah,
How does...
So what elements of your life connects to the events of Where Madness Lies?
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, basically the part about my journey in McLean is very connected. And then the part, really, the most important part, I guess, is really the end about, you know, the family finally sort of coming out of the shadows and coming out of the darkness and being able to find love in a way, because I don't think you can really feel really feel true love. And I don't mean true love, romantic love. I just mean love for your family and the connectedness until you rid yourself of like the barriers of fear and shame. So, I mean, for me, it was just this, you know, sort of almost like coming alive after being in McLean and after being, you know, keeping all those feelings and emotions locked down for so long and finally discovering who I was and feeling this, it's like your mind gets to be, you finally get to be open and curious, like, you know, and I remember so well, like, after I got out of McLean and finally wasn't depressed anymore. And that was for a number of different reasons. I went to therapy and I also was on medication. But the freedom from depression just allowed this openness, and I was just wanted to learn about everything, you know.
How do you manage? Have you found your depression is completely gone, or are you better equipped to identify it when it's coming on, that you're able to kind of battle away, or how do you?
So yeah, you learn. You know, obviously, you learn your own patterns, right? Like, you know, I can feel little slips, and I sort of know for me, like, it's so funny because I took some of my mother and some of my father. So if I'm feeling, you know, and I can feel a little bit not great, the best thing is exercise, walking in the woods for me. And also getting intellectually involved from my father's side. So, and knowing, I think the biggest thing is that knowing, not being afraid of it, knowing that, you know, it will, like, an episode will pass. You know, when you're depressed, you feel hopeless, right? That's part of depression. So you feel this hopelessness. And so you have to really remind yourself, because it's an overwhelming feeling, that hopelessness. You just have to keep telling your brain, it's not hopeless, this will pass, and I will get through this. And so learning, you know, different coping skills. And for me, in a way, I'm a little bit easier than some people. I think people who have sort of a more gray, or like I'm feeling blue depression, for me it was black and white kind of. I had major depression. If I don't take my medicine, it's like type 1 diabetes. I'll have major depression. But I also obviously swing. And, you know, I'm old enough now. I'm pretty good at dealing with it. And I remind myself, you know, what do I need to do? I mean, there are some really concrete things that help.
Yeah. No, definitely. I was talking to another individual, Tony Summers, or Anthony Summers, about, we were talking about depression and fear. Do you feel now that obviously now mental health is more to the foreground, and it's talked about, it's easily accessible information on it. Well, the question I'm going to ask is, do you feel we're doing it? It's quite a broad question I'm going to ask, but do you feel we're just too easy to prescribe medicine? I know some people, before everyone jumps around, I'm not anti-medicine or anything like that. I know some people do need medication to manage certain things. But do you feel that what I'm trying to say is, do you feel as a proper way of dealing with it would be to give someone the tools, like a deeper understanding of themselves, and then the tools to manage it? Or do you think a lot of people, unfortunately, probably due to maybe pressures, doctors under a lot of pressure, it's just easy to just go, there's a prescription for some drugs, take 2 of them a day, and yeah, I'll see them.
Yeah, I mean, so because of what happened to me, my sister actually became a psychiatrist, and she's a child psychiatrist, and she's a very well-known child psychiatrist. And I could almost hear her talking to me now. Like, no, just a simple prescription is never the answer, right? It's so much more complicated. Do some people get help with medication? Absolutely. And it can help people tremendously. But there's no way you should be just taking medication and not doing some kind of therapy or learning, whether it's learning coping skills or understanding what triggers you. It's a combination for sure. For me, it was clearly, and I know it was a combination absolutely of medicine. And I had a lot of therapy. I was one of the last people probably to ever go through true psychoanalysis. I went 5 days a week for years. And then I also had a psychic to help me on top of that, that psychic piece was amazing because she would just come out, it wasn't like me lying on a couch sort of slowly ruminating. It was like she came out and told me what was going on. And it was like, whoa, I had to look at that. So, I absolutely am a believer in there's all sorts of help. And I think it would be a mistake to take a medication without having some form of therapy. I think you really, to get the best benefit for your own mental health, I think you need both. I think you also have to have the right fit of a therapist. I remember bringing my daughter to one therapist who was absolutely horrible for her, and I didn't realize it for a while, but it has to be the right person. Not, there are a lot of therapists that don't work for people, what I want, I know I teach chemistry, but if I'm talking to my students about this, I say, just don't give up. Like, if it doesn't feel right, it might not be right. So there's another person right down the road, try that.
Yeah, that definitely. I think that's one of the issues today is that we're kind of, we don't look into ourselves. We look for distractions, whether it's again not knocking it, whether it's Netflix or whatever, or
right.
At the bottom of a bottle. It's just we'll push that to the side. We'll worry about that tomorrow. Which is obviously not.
Well, and that certainly I did that, right? Like, who doesn't? Like, yeah, well, that'll go away. Maybe it'll just go away. I'll feel better tomorrow. And sometimes that's great. That happens. And then sometimes you end up like me, like being so far down, they have to put you somewhere in an institution, and then you have no choice. So, it catches up to you, to some people.
With obviously, you mentioned, I know we're pushed for time, but you mentioned there about you obviously went to the psychic as well. Can you tell us a bit more about that? What way did that? What way did those sessions plan out? What way did that work when you went to see her?
I'm sorry. Can you? It's my microphone is terrible. I just missed the last part. What?
So you mentioned obviously you went to see a therapist and a psychiatrist, but you also mentioned you went to see a psychic. What way did that work? What were the sessions like with her?
Oh God. Okay. So we opened up a big door here, but I'm going to just give you one example. All right. And this has to do with my oldest daughter, Erica. And Erica was pregnant with her first child, and she had just suffered a miscarriage. So this pregnancy made her very nervous. And I was worried and nervous, but okay. Erica was healthy. And on New Year's Eve, she had a doctor's appointment, an ultrasound, that to look at the baby. And the ultrasound technician told Erica something that Erica didn't really understand. Erica called me up absolutely hysterical. I mean, so she could barely speak. She said something like the ultrasound said there's an enlarged artery in the baby's head. And I mean, Erica was devastated, and I was nervous and worried. And I have a number of doctors in my family, including my nephew, who's a wonderful radiologist. And as soon as I got off the phone with Erica, she was in Boston at the time, and I was visiting my father in Chicago. As soon as I got off the phone with Erica, I didn't call any of the doctors. I called my psychic, Sophie, right? And so Sophie read some cards, and she said, no, the baby's absolutely fine. That's ridiculous. But Erica can't have sex for 2 weeks. And I was like, well, I can't tell my daughter that. Like, that's not my business. I mean, I know I'm all open and everything, but that was like a little too far. So and Sophie continued and said, there's nothing wrong with the baby. She repeated that. And she said, but something hasn't moved yet. And something that will move in about 2 weeks, and then she'll be fine. But you need to tell her she can't have sex. And I'm like, okay, fine. At least the baby's fine, I think. Then a couple days later, Erica met with her doctor, and her doctor said the baby's fine. What the technician saw is something called an artifact, not an artery. Artifacts come into sound waves. It has nothing to do with the baby. It's just like sort of some kind of a skewed picture or something. And but he said your placenta hasn't moved yet. It's still really low laying. So if you do have sex within the next 2 weeks, you'll probably have spotting or bleeding. Nothing to worry about, but because you're who you are, you might freak out. If you freak out, come and I'll give you another ultrasound, right? Yeah. And of course, she did have sex. Not that that's the end of the story, and she was fine, and the baby's fine, and the baby's 6 years old now. But that Sophie knew that specific amount of detail. And this happened all the time with her. Like, I mean, for me, obviously, there's just like, there's such comfort in that, but it's more than, I think it's bigger than just comfort. I mean, through Sophie, I really did learn that actually things do sort of happen for a reason. And I know that's cliche, but it was just amazing. I mean, I wish I would have tape recorded some of my sessions with her, because they were unbelievable. And she would say them, and she was a chain smoker and a coffee drinker, and she would say them in sort of this kind of like rough sort of way. And, but she would get these things so eerily correct over and over again. And it wasn't like seeing my dead grandmother, who maybe I had told her about. They were really future predictions that were pretty much right all the time. So it was amazing.
Yeah. No. Do you still speak to her today? Or are you still in touch with her?
Well, she died about a little over a year ago. So I'm only in touch. Like, I keep asking. She did send me one message. I asked for a message, and she did send me one, and it was a very clear message. But no, I don't have any. I don't have a good psychic right now. It's kind of a loss in my life. Yeah. I'm seeking a psychic.
Okay. Basically, how can Where Madness Lies help us today, especially in the times we're in at the moment with all that's going on? Yeah. It's anyone watching might be very familiar with it.
It's crazy. I do hope that there's a message, and the message for me is to listen, to be open and to listen, and through the listening. And so in the book, the grandmother has her prejudices and her like sort of rigid, her rigidness, and the granddaughter also has these ideas of that the grandmother's mean and not very nice. And it's really through listening and letting go of some of the prejudgments, right? And really understanding where the fears are in the other, right? And with that, you then can have empathy. And I think that's such a huge problem in our society. I mean, we're so good at blaming, we're so good at pointing fingers, it's so easy to be angry and to say they're stupid and they're an idiot and whatever, and not understand. And I do really believe it's about sitting down with the other side or other sides, there are many sides, and trying to understand our common humanity. Because if you think about what happened in Germany and what we started this whole conversation with, which was really about, how can humans do that to each other? Well, maybe if we sat down together and we really began to understand where our fears and our prejudices come from, we can let go of those. And so there's an openness. I mean, I do hope that, people see that this relationship between the grandmother and grandmother, it becomes an open relationship and an honest relationship, and that leads to love.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think if you, I'm cursed with a real big curiosity in what's going on in the world. I try to not try to cut myself off from things at times, just for my own mental health. But basically, the curiosity always kind of brings you back. And I think one of the things that I've seen is that we talk about repression, about you see that in various different groups today, where you'll see a reporter from one news agency which is kind of tied to this group, and another news agency is tied to this group.
Right.
And you see when that reporter goes to speak to them, you see people come up saying, "Don't be speaking to him. He's part of that news agency, which is to this political candidate," and then vice versa. And you see that. You see it today. It's this. Everyone's in. You hear about echo chambers and social media, and it's like if you dare to kind of look and see what the other side's doing and take an interest, it's like, how dare you? And I think the point you made there is right. I think if there's no civil discourse,
right.
As once was, it's just all shouting matches.
Right.
Loudest.
Right. It is. Yeah. We need more civil discourse. That's exactly what we need. Anyway, that's what I would hope that one of the messages in the book can bring.
There's always there's pictures in the books. What's the significance of the pictures in the novel itself?
I'm sorry, I missed that one too.
Yes, what is the significance of the pictures in the book?
Oh, the pictures. Oh, good. Sorry. So the pictures are actually the real people that I describe as their characters in the book. But I think it's sort of a fun thing to look at. I've always liked to look at, if you read something you like, to connect to the pictures, and you do, because we use all of our senses, right? I mean, we want to use our smell and our sight, and so it just brings another layer. It brings another depth to the book, I think, when you actually can visualize. I mean, hopefully my words will give you a picture, but then when you place a real picture on top of that, it just brings a certain depth to it, I think.
And how long, if I can ask, how long did it take you to write the book? This is your second novel, isn't it?
Yeah. So this one was not a straight line, right? It wasn't like, keep in mind that I also obviously I work and have kids and grandkids, but so on and off, I would say 5 years, but it's, again, there was no straight line here, because I think I took notes on this years and years ago, and then you do other things in the middle, and so it, I'm going to say 5.
5. Do you have periods where you sit and write, or do you, or was it intermittent periods? Then did you fancy just go, right, I need to get this book out? Or what way does your writing work? What way does it work when you're putting the book together? So
I need good chunks of time, because the first, say, 40 minutes of writing, I'm not really in it. So sometimes it's hard, but I am a teacher, so we do have these breaks. So I'm allowed, sometimes I will literally just lock myself in a room for a week, and then I'll get a lot done. So I can get a lot done in a short period of time.
Yeah.
And then the editing process, I don't have to do doesn't have to be quite so focused. I can do that over a longer period. But to get out the real, sort of the outline of the story, I need to do that in sort of an intense week or two. And then work on it, keep changing it.
Yeah. Is there, are you working on the next book at the moment then, or?
So yeah, I've started, and I haven't, unfortunately, because, times are crazy, right? I keep getting, one distraction and another. I just had another granddaughter. But the next one is actually more about my psychic and medium journeys, and some of the amazing things that I've discovered, and some of the frauds, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, excellent. Do you have a release date at the moment for that, or is that still?
No, that's a waste.
Just to finish off, last question. What would be one of the biggest lessons you've learned in life so far? What would be one of the ones that kind of sticks out for you?
I think it's about keeping an open mind. I think that I tell my students, only a closed mind is certain. And, if you remember that, keep an open mind. Be willing to learn, be willing to listen, most of all. And I learn this from teaching students, and I learn it from my grandchildren all the time too, is be curious. Yeah. Be curious. Find out. Don't dismiss somebody because they were in a mental hospital.
Yeah. No, definitely. That definitely, I think that's good. I think having that kind of mindset is it's really important. And it's even it's the essence of science as well. It's
right.
Going into something, not bringing your own how you want an experiment to go.
Right. Exactly. I love that. Yes, it's not how you want it to go.
Yeah.
But guess what? It's how it went, and we have to learn from this.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Sylvia, so where can people read Where Madness Lies? As I mentioned at the start of the interview, it's released on the 1st of February. And how can they get in touch with yourself?
So you can get it pretty much anywhere, how Google works, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Waterstones. I have a website, sylviatrue.com. Okay. And I love questions. I love talking to people. I love connecting. So I'm happy to connect with anybody about any of these issues, whether it's mental illness or psychic journeys. It's all good.
Yeah, I'll include the link on the show notes below, so when people click on this WhatsApp, so they can access that.
Right.
Sylvia, thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming on today and sharing your story. And I think, especially on the day, today.
I know, right?
I think it's really important that conversations like this are part of that. I say, unfortunately, a dark part of human history, but. Thank you for coming on, and good luck with the new book as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.